Are there advantages? I know, Angela, you had mentioned that there were some advantages to being able to stay connected internationally with everyone these days. Are there also some challenges, and how do you see that playing into our sense of community?
You know, the new technologies of communication, social media, technologies such as the one we're using to develop this program, constitute the way in which we communicate today. Of course, there are disadvantages. You know, of course, people are often under the impression that if they get 10,000 likes on social media, that's equivalent to, you know, organizing those 10,000 people, and that's just not true. I think there are great advantages to be able to connect with people instantaneously all over the world. But we cannot overestimate the work that we're doing when we're connecting. We're simply connecting. Social media won't do the work of organizing for us. And I think that it's important to recognize that we should use the technology, not allow the technology to use us. Now, I really appreciate, Leah, the point that you made about this current pandemic being a consequence of capitalism. You know, and certainly the very conditions that allow us to be holed up in our homes and allow us to communicate through these media are technologies that have been produced by global capitalism. So in many ways, the pandemic was created by the very conditions that allow us to continue to be in touch with one another. And of course, you know, global capitalism is always racial capitalism. And you know, we forget that you know, people are surprised when they discover that it's Black communities, that it's Latinx communities that are hardest hit by this pandemic. But it's always been that way. That's what structural racism is all about. And people are, of course, witnessing the concrete consequences of this, the deaths that are a direct result of this structural racism that is embedded in capitalism, global capitalism. And so I think, yeah, it's very important to reach out to people in other places in ways that we can actually learn from them. You know, I should say that because we live in the U.S. You're in Ecuador, of course, but you know, we're living here. Leah, Davíd, and I are in this nation that represents itself as the most important spot on the globe, and that's just not true. You know, American exceptionalism has always been so devastatingly dangerous. So I see the importance of these technologies as allowing us to learn from others. Unfortunately, even those of us who are involved in progressive movements always assume that because we come from the United States of America, we know best. But there is so much that we have to learn from people who are struggling in Brazil, from Palestinians who have been engaged in an ongoing struggle for decades and decades, since 1948, even before. From the Kurdish people, and especially those of us who do feminist work, we have a great deal to learn from the ways in which women have been lifted up by the Kurdish struggle for liberation. So I see it in that way. We have to be aware of the ways in which the technology can use us in disadvantageous ways, but we can use the technology to build greater global movements, which is exactly what we need during this moment.
Angela, I just recently had the opportunity of reading your autobiography from 1974, and it was incredibly inspiring and life-changing for me. And you speak so much about the organizing that you were doing during this story, and that it's like relationships. You're like actually traveling in cars or buses from one place to another and meeting people and talking with them and traveling back and meeting other people and then back and forth and connecting individuals in like real time. And I've gotten to watch my mom do a lot of similar kind of organizing as I've grown up. And it's so different now because, as you said, like somebody might put something on Facebook and 10,000 likes, like what does that mean? And so I guess my question, I'm really inspired by you offering examples internationally of people to learn from. And I'm wondering also if you could share, for somebody like me who's challenged by being on the computer very much, what kind of platforms or technologies have you found to be most helpful for bringing people together or sharing stories? Email or Facebook or podcasts or being part of a group that you just are subscribed to and you get their information.
All of those things. And because I've been actually involved in projects in other countries, I keep in touch. For example, I'm a member of the International Advisory Board of an organization in Australia, located in Queensland, called Sisters Inside. And so I'm constantly in touch with the work that they're doing. They focus on women in prison, but also they assist women who have been released from prison. It's an abolitionist group, so they also advocate for the abolition of prisons. And I'm in constant contact with them. I'm also in touch with people in largely feminist groups in Brazil. But I try to read as widely as possible. And I try to, I use, I'm on the Portside list, and I don't know if you're familiar with Portside. So that's an important list that I think I get about 4 or 5 emails per day.
Yeah.
Portside. Yeah, I sort of, cobble together. I'm not on Twitter.
Yeah.
and I lurk on Facebook.
Yeah.
But when it's necessary, I will go on Facebook and look at something on Facebook Live. And I mean, I just did something yesterday with a group called Girls Trek that was being broadcast across Facebook. So I think all of these platforms are important, but they don't do the work for us. And of course, we make the decisions about how we want to focus our lives. And I think that your work on food justice is so important on a global scale, particularly, given the ravages of corporations like Monsanto, or basically trying to colonize the earth. And that definitely has to be a global struggle. And, Davíd's work, I mean, from the work you did in high school, challenging the militarization of school, the militarization of police. Of course, this is happening all over the world. And if we don't make an effort to reach out, we look at the issues myopically.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that we have a great deal to learn from people struggling in other parts of the world.
Right.
I find that fascinating what you're both talking about, Leah and Angela, about looking elsewhere outside of your immediate space and immediate region for what's happening in other parts of the world and what's happening even down the road. Davíd, my question to you is, you've done a lot of traveling. You've done a lot of traveling through Latin America as well. You lived in Cuba. What was your experience of community there? What did you see? And then how does that relate to the struggles that you're experiencing back home as well? Because you're still involved with immigrants' rights work. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I've been really fortunate to have the opportunities to travel and to live in other places, and those experiences for me have been among the most transformative in my life, like just absolutely the most transformative. To see that other people in other parts of the world, whether it's in Cuba, in Chiapas, in Zapatista communities are struggling, and it's all because of the same kind of, the Zapatistas call it the capitalist hydra, right? It's like the same beast, the same empire, but it has an effect on people all over the globe. You all were talking about social media and connecting, and I completely agree with you, Angela. I think we have to take a step beyond that, and because of that, over the past 3-4 years, like I was mentioning earlier, I've done a lot of work to take students of color, working class students, to places like Cuba, to places like Puerto Rico. The last trip we took was to Puerto Rico, and I took a group of students from San Diego, and we looked at U.S. colonialism in Puerto Rico, and how is it that people are fighting gentrification in Puerto Rico in the same way that we are here in our communities, right? Like our people, my community is struggling with gentrification, and in Puerto Rico, it's exactly the same thing. People, because after the hurricane, wealthy people came in and took advantage and bought a bunch of the buildings, and now are repurposing them for millionaires who can now have vacation homes in Puerto Rico, right? So to have young students who have never traveled go to places like this and see that other people also struggle in the same way across the globe is so transformative. Like I'm a teacher, and I think that's the most transformative kind of pedagogy that I have ever seen employed, to have students actually be witness to that. And then to see them come back with kind of like a renewed sense of inspiration and struggle, and to share then those lessons learned in their own community, is there's nothing like it, right? And of course, now we're living in this COVID-19 era, and who knows what's going to come of traveling and in this work that I started, some years back, but I want to continue doing it, and I am really wary and careful. I want to be really careful about technology, as you all were speaking of. I think it's seductive, and I think it can actually do the opposite. It can just keep us from not seeing what's actually going out there. So we have to be really careful with it and use it to our advantage. I mean, currently here in San Diego, we have Immigration Detention Center, the one with the highest cases of COVID-19. It's truly a death sentence, right? And community activists here have used media to spread the word about this situation of how migrants are being treated in these prisons, and are getting the states and to release some of these immigrants. And there's a lot of work to be done, but I think it's an example of how we can use social media and these platforms to promote equity and social justice and the end of this empire.